My name is Matthew and I was born blind. I know what you're thinking. How can a blind man camp? Believe me, I've heard that question many times over the years. The truth is, I'm much more capable than people give me credit for. My other senses are incredibly sharp and I have learned to explore the world in ways that most sighted people can't even understand. I can tell what kind of bird a bird is 50 meters away. I can tell who a person is across the room by the sound of their footsteps, and I can find my way through the woods using only sound and smell. In many ways, I am more wilderness-ready than my sighted friends. My other senses are much more developed than those of normal people. So when my friends Ryan and Harry suggested a weekend camping trip in the Adirondacks, I said yes without hesitation. We had been friends since college and they never saw my blindness as an insurmountable obstacle. Ryan was a nature lover, always talking about hiking trails and fishing spots, while Harry was more of a city guy and went on these adventures mostly to drink and tell stories. They both knew I could handle myself, and to be honest, I was looking forward to getting away from the hustle and bustle of the city for a few days. The drive to the mountains took about 4 hours. Ryan drove while Harry gave directions and I sat in the back, listening to them argue about which road to take and how much beer we had bought. About an hour before we reached our destination, the smell of pine trees wafted in through the windows and I felt my excitement grow. The smell of the deep forest meant something to me. Earthy, clean, a vitality you never find in the city. We were heading to a remote area that Ryan had found on the internet. There were no designated campsites, no facilities, just pure wilderness. I was excited for a real camping experience, away from families with screaming children and RVs with generators running all night. When we finally parked at the trailhead, I immediately felt how isolated we were. The parking area was a small clearing on the side of a dirt road where Ryan's SUV could barely fit. There were no other cars, no sounds of civilization, just the whisper of the wind blowing through the trees and what sounded like a distant hawk. The air was cool and clean, with that special smell of autumn leaves beginning to change. "All right, Matthew," Ryan said, shouldering his pack. "You ready for this?" It's about a 1.5-mile hike to the spot I picked out. I adjusted my own pack and grabbed my hiking stick. "Lead the way, mountain man." The trail was well defined at first, clearly marked by the footsteps of previous hikers. I could hear Ryan's heavy boots crunching on fallen leaves ahead of me, with Harry's lighter step bringing up the rear. My stick helped me navigate around roots and rocks, and I fell into the familiar rhythm of forest hiking. Every few minutes, Ryan would call out obstacles: "Low branch coming up on your right," or "There's a decent-sized rock in the path about 3 steps ahead." But for the most part, I managed fine on my own. About 20 minutes in, the trail started to get rougher. The sound of Ryan's footsteps changed, becoming more careful and deliberate. "Trail's getting a bit sketchy here, Matthew," he called back. "Lot more roots and rocks. You want me to give you a hand?" "I'm good," I replied, though I did slow my pace. The undergrowth was thicker here, and I could hear smaller branches scraping against our packs as we pushed through. The canopy above us must have been pretty dense too, because the air felt different, more enclosed, with less of the open sky feeling I'd had at the start of the hike. "Jesus, Ryan," Harry panted from behind me. "When you said a little hike, I thought you meant like a nature walk. This is turning into a damn expedition." "Quit whining," Ryan laughed. "We're almost there, and trust me, it'll be worth it when you see this spot." He was right. When we finally reached our destination, even I could tell it was something special. The sound of our footsteps changed completely as we emerged into what must have been a fairly large clearing. The echo of our voices became more open, and I could feel the warmth of direct sunlight on my face for the first time since we'd started hiking. There was also the sound of running water nearby, a stream or small river by the sound of it. "Holy shit," Harry breathed. "Okay, this is actually amazing." Ryan started describing the scene for my benefit, something he'd gotten into the habit of doing over the years. "We're in this circular clearing, maybe 50 yards across. There's a stream running along the western edge. I can see some decent fishing spots from here. Trees all around us, but they're set back enough that we'll get plenty of sunlight during the day. And Matthew, the best part, we are completely alone out here. I don't see any signs of other campers, no trash, nothing. It's perfect." We spent the next hour setting up camp. I'd become pretty efficient at handling my share of the work over the years. While Ryan and Harry dealt with the tent stakes and guy lines, I gathered firewood and helped organize our supplies. My ability to identify dry wood by sound and touch actually made me better at firewood collection than most sighted people. I could tell by the way a piece of deadfall sounded when I tapped it whether it would burn well or just smolder and smoke. By the time the sun started to set, which I could feel more than see, as the air temperature began to drop and the quality of sound around us shifted, we had a solid camp established. Ryan had managed to catch 3 decent-sized trout from the stream, which we cooked over the fire along with some foil packets of vegetables. It was one of those perfect outdoor meals that always seems to taste better than anything you could make in a kitchen. "You know what?" Harry said, already working on his second beer. "I take back everything I said about this being too much work. This is exactly what I needed." "Told you," Ryan replied, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. "Sometimes you've got to get away from everything to remember what actually matters." I felt the same way. Being in the wilderness allows you to see things from a different perspective. Here, my blindness didn't feel like an obstacle, but like another way of experiencing the world. I could distinguish every sound around us, the gentle current of the stream, the rustle of small animals in the bushes, the soft hoot of a distant owl. As the evening wore on, Ryan and Harry began to drink heavily. Harry had brought a bottle of fine whiskey he was saving for a special occasion, and Ryan had brought enough beer for a small party. I only had a couple of beers, preferring to stay awake in unfamiliar surroundings. "Matthew, are you sure you don't want some of this whiskey?" Harry spoke in a voice that clearly indicated he was getting drunk. "This stuff cost me $80 a bottle. One has to stay sober to deal with problems," I replied. "What problems?" Ryan laughed, but his smile was already starting to loosen from the alcohol. "It's a lonely place, man. The biggest problem we're gonna run into is running out of beer." They were right about being in the middle of nowhere. As the night wore on, the feeling of isolation became even more pronounced. The sounds of civilization that you don't even notice in the city, distant traffic noise, the occasional passing plane were completely absent. There was only us, the fire, and the wilderness. Ryan and Harry were seriously drunk. Their conversation was getting louder and more incoherent by the minute. "You know what my favorite part of camping is?" Harry asked, his words very vague. It's like we're back to cavemen, you know? Just us, the fire, and nature." "Deep thoughts, Harry," Ryan said sarcastically, really philosophical. I was getting tired and had decided to go to bed when I heard it for the first time. It was so faint I almost missed it, a soft scratching sound coming from beyond the borders of our camp. I cocked my head and started to listen more carefully, but just then Ryan burst out laughing at something Harry had said and drowned out the sound. "Hey guys," I said, "did you hear that?" "Hear what?" Ryan asked, though he didn't sound particularly interested in my answer. I listened again, but whatever I'd heard was gone. Never mind, probably just an animal. Another hour passed, and my friends got progressively more intoxicated. Harry eventually gave up on coherent conversation and just started humming tunelessly to himself, while Ryan kept poking at the fire with a stick, sending showers of sparks up into the night sky. I was about to suggest we all get some sleep when Harry suddenly stood up, swayed dangerously, and announced he needed to piss. "Don't go too far," I warned him, "and take a flashlight." "I'm fine," he mumbled, stumbling off in the direction of the stream. "Just gonna water the trees." He was gone for maybe 10 minutes before I heard him crashing back through the underbrush, breathing heavily. "Jesus Christ," he panted. That was weird." "What was weird?" I asked, immediately alert. "I was doing my business, right? And I heard something moving around out there, something big. I thought maybe it was a deer or something, but when I turned my flashlight toward the sound," he paused, and I could hear him taking another drink. "I swear I saw eyes reflecting back at me, but they were too high off the ground to be a deer, and they were just watching me." Ryan snorted. "You're drunk, Harry. You probably saw a raccoon and your whiskey-soaked brain turned it into Bigfoot." "I know what I saw," Harry insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. Harry was drunk enough to see things that were definitely not there, but there was something about what he was saying that bothered me. When he came back, his tone had changed from a cheerful drunkenness to more of a nervous drunkenness. By midnight, both my friends were completely drunk. Ryan had stopped feeding the fire properly, so it was almost out, leaving only glowing embers. Harry had passed out in his camp chair, his head thrown back and snoring loudly. Ryan was technically still awake, but he was mumbling incoherently and seemed to be having trouble keeping his eyes open. Within 5 minutes he had passed out too, slumped in his chair next to Harry. I tried to wake them both up, thinking they would be more comfortable in their sleeping bags, but they were completely asleep. Harry didn't even move when I shook his shoulder, and Ryan mumbled something unintelligible and kept snoring. I sighed and decided to let them sleep it off where they were. It wasn't ideal, but they'd probably be fine for one night. I made sure the fire was properly banked so it wouldn't spread or die out completely, then retreated to our tent. I'd been planning to sleep outside under the stars, but something about Harry's story and the general isolation of our location made me want the psychological comfort of having walls around me, even if they were just thin nylon. I settled into my sleeping bag and tried to get comfortable. The sounds of the night forest were all around me, the gentle babble of the stream, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, the occasional hoot of an owl. Under normal circumstances, these sounds would have been soothing, helping me drift off to sleep. But tonight, something felt different. Maybe it was Harry's story about the eyes, or maybe it was just the fact that I was alone and alert while my friends were unconscious, but I found myself listening more intently than usual. Every sound seemed amplified, every rustle potentially significant. I kept telling myself I was being paranoid, that there was nothing out there but normal forest wildlife, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching our camp. I must have been lying there for about an hour when I heard it clearly for the first time, a sound that definitely didn't belong in the normal symphony of forest noises. It was a deliberate scratching, like claws or fingernails being dragged across bark. The sound was rhythmic, purposeful, and it was moving. I held my breath and listened more carefully. The scratching would happen for a few seconds, then stop, then start again from a slightly different location. Whatever was making the sound was circling our camp, staying just beyond the edge of the clearing where the firelight couldn't reach. My heart started beating faster. This wasn't the random movement of an animal foraging for food. This was methodical, almost like something was conducting reconnaissance. I considered waking up Ryan and Harry, but they were so completely passed out that I wasn't sure I could rouse them even if I tried. And what would I tell them? That I heard scratching sounds? They'd probably just assume I was being paranoid. The scratching continued for another 10 minutes before it stopped completely. I waited, straining to hear anything else, but the forest had gone quiet. Even the normal night sounds seemed muted, as if every creature in the area was holding its breath. The silence was actually more unnerving than the scratching had been. I was just starting to relax when I heard a new sound, footsteps. Not the four-legged gait of an animal, but the distinct bipedal rhythm of something walking upright. The steps were slow and deliberate, crunching softly on the fallen leaves that carpeted the forest floor. Then they were getting closer. I sat up in my sleeping bag, my heart now pounding so hard I was sure it must be audible. The footsteps paused at what I judged to be the edge of our clearing. Maybe 30 yards from the tent. I could feel rather than hear a presence out there, something large and still, watching our camp. "Hello?" I called out softly, not wanting to wake my friends, but needing to know if there was a person out there. "Is someone there?" The silence that followed was absolute. Even the stream seemed to have gone quiet. For a long moment, nothing happened, and I began to wonder if I'd imagined the whole thing. Then I heard a sound that made my blood run cold, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from deep in the throat of something much larger than any local wildlife I could think of. The growl lasted for maybe 5 seconds, then cut off abruptly. The normal sounds of the forest slowly began to return. The babble of the stream, the rustle of leaves, but I could still sense that presence out there in the darkness, watching and waiting. I reached for my cell phone, thinking I might be able to use its flashlight to see what was out there, but of course there was no signal this deep in the wilderness. The phone was useless for anything except telling time, which showed it was now almost 2 in the morning. For the next hour, I lay motionless in my sleeping bag, listening to every sound with hyper-focused attention. The footsteps would start and stop, sometimes seeming to circle the camp, sometimes approaching closer to the tent before retreating. Whatever was out there was definitely intelligent. It seemed to understand the layout of our camp, and was deliberately staying just beyond the range of the dying firelight. Around 3 o'clock, the sounds changed again. Instead of footsteps, I started hearing what I could only describe as tapping, a rhythmic knocking sound, like someone rapping their knuckles against wood. The tapping would come in groups of 3, pause for a few seconds, then repeat. It seemed to be coming from different directions each time, as if whatever was making the sound was moving from tree to tree around the perimeter of our camp. I couldn't take it anymore. I unzipped my sleeping bag as quietly as possible and crawled to the tent entrance. My friends were still passed out in their chairs by the fire, completely oblivious to what was happening around them. The fire had died down to just a few glowing coals, casting barely enough light to illuminate their unconscious forms. "Ryan," I whispered as loudly as I dared. "Harry, wake up." Neither of them stirred. Ryan was snoring steadily, and Harry had somehow managed to slide partway out of his chair without waking up. They were both dead to the world. The tapping sound stopped abruptly, and I realized that whoever or whatever was out there had heard me trying to wake my friends. The silence that followed was thick with tension, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. I could feel eyes on me, studying my movements, calculating. Then I heard something that nearly made me cry out in terror, the sound of my name being called from somewhere in the darkness beyond our camp. "Matthew." The voice was barely above a whisper, but it was clearly human, or at least something trying very hard to sound human. "Matthew, come here." The voice was wrong in a way I couldn't quite define. The cadence was off, like someone trying to mimic human speech patterns without fully understanding them. And there was something underneath the words, a quality that reminded me of the growl I'd heard earlier. "Matthew," the voice called again, this time from a different direction. "We want to show you something." My mind was racing. How did whatever was out there know my name? Had it been listening to our conversations earlier in the evening? The use of "we" was also deeply unsettling. It implied that there was more than one of them out there. I backed deeper into the tent, my hands shaking as I fumbled for my hiking stick. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it was better than nothing. The voice continued to call my name from different locations around the camp, sometimes sounding closer, sometimes farther away. It was like they were playing with me, demonstrating that they could move around our perimeter at will. "Matthew, don't be afraid, we just want to talk." The hell with staying quiet. I crawled out of the tent and over to where Ryan was slumped in his chair. I grabbed his shoulders and shook him as hard as I could. "Ryan, wake up, something's wrong." He stirred slightly and mumbled something incoherent, but his eyes didn't open. I tried slapping his face lightly, but he just groaned and turned his head away. The alcohol had him completely under. The voices started laughing, a sound like breaking glass mixed with the cough of a large predator. There were definitely multiple voices now coming from all around us. They were enjoying my panic, feeding off my fear. "Your friends can't help you, Matthew," one of the voices said, this one much closer than the others. "They're sleeping so deeply it would be such a shame to wake them." I spun toward the sound, raising my hiking stick defensively. "What do you want? Who are you?" "We're your neighbors," another voice replied from behind me. "We live here. You're camping in our home." "We don't mean any harm," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We'll leave in the morning. We're sorry for disturbing you." "Oh, but we like having visitors," a third voice chimed in. "It gets so lonely out here. We so rarely get to play with new friends." The word "play" made my stomach clench with dread. Whatever these things were, they definitely weren't human, despite their attempts at human speech. There was something fundamentally alien about their voices, like they were filtering human language through a completely different kind of throat. I heard movement from multiple directions now, the sound of large bodies pushing through the underbrush, circling closer to our camp. They were being deliberate about it, making sure I could hear them coming, building the terror before whatever they had planned. "Please," I said, backing toward the center of the camp where my unconscious friend sat. "Just leave us alone." "But Matthew," the first voice said, now sounding like it was right at the edge of the firelight, "we've been watching you all evening. You're so much more interesting than your friends. You see with your ears, don't you? You hear things they can't hear. You smell things they can't smell," added another voice. "You understand the forest in ways they never could," said a third. They were right, and that scared me more than anything else they could have said. My enhanced senses, which had always been my strength, were now working against me. I could hear every footstep, every breath, every whisper of movement. I could smell their musk, a wild animal scent mixed with something else that reminded me of decay. I was hyper-aware of their presence in a way that was driving me toward panic. "We want to show you something special, Matthew," the closest voice said. "Something your friends could never appreciate. Come with us." "No," I said firmly, though my voice was shaking. "I'm staying right here." "Are you sure?" another voice asked, and I could hear amusement in its tone. "Look at your friends, Matthew. Look how helpless they are. How easy it would be for something to happen to them while they sleep." The threat was clear. I gripped my hiking stick tighter and moved to position myself between the voices and my unconscious friends. Whatever these things were planning, I wouldn't let them hurt Ryan and Harry. "If you touch them, I will. You'll what?" The laughter started again, coming from all around us now. "You can't even see us, Matthew. How could you possibly stop us?" They were right, and we all knew it. I was one blind man with a hiking stick, facing an unknown number of hostile entities in their own territory, while trying to protect two unconscious people. The situation was hopeless. But then I remembered something Ryan had said earlier about the fire. He'd mentioned that we should keep it burning all night because it would keep animals away. The fire had died down to almost nothing, but there were still glowing coals, and we had plenty of dry wood stacked nearby. Moving as quickly as I could while trying not to trip over my friend's legs, I made my way to the woodpile and grabbed an armful of the driest kindling I could find. The voices were getting closer, and I could hear multiple sets of footsteps converging on our camp. I dropped to my knees next to the fire pit and started feeding small twigs and dry leaves to the glowing coals. The first few pieces caught immediately, sending up small flames that began to push back the darkness around us. "No, no, Matthew," one of the voices said, much closer now. "We don't like the bright light. It hurts our eyes." "Good," I muttered, adding larger pieces of wood to the growing flames. The fire began to crackle and pop, throwing dancing shadows across the campsite and illuminating the area around my friend's chairs. I heard the footsteps retreating slightly, but the voices continued. "You can't keep that fire burning forever, Matthew. Eventually you'll run out of wood. Eventually you'll have to sleep. We're very patient," another voice added. "We can wait." They were right again, but at least the fire was buying me time. I continued feeding it wood, building it up to a roaring blaze that lit up a good 30-foot radius around our camp. For the first time in hours, I felt like I could breathe properly. The voices pulled back but didn't disappear entirely. I could still hear them whispering among themselves in the darkness beyond the firelight, occasional words floating back to me on the night breeze. They seemed to be discussing something, planning their next move. I spent the next few hours alternating between feeding the fire and trying unsuccessfully to wake my friends. Ryan and Harry were so completely unconscious that I was starting to worry they'd consumed enough alcohol to actually poison themselves. Their breathing seemed regular and strong, but they showed no signs of stirring even when I shouted directly in their ears. As the night wore on, the entities in the forest seemed to grow bolder. They would venture closer to the edge of the firelight, and I would catch glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision. Shapes that didn't quite look right. Shadows that moved independently of any obvious source. The voices continued their taunting, sometimes calling my name, sometimes making threats, sometimes just laughing that terrible glass-breaking laugh. "Matthew, why are you fighting us?" one of them asked around 5 in the morning. "We're not going to hurt you, we just want to be friends." "Friends don't threaten people," I replied, throwing another log on the fire. "But we haven't threatened you," the voice said, and I could hear mock innocence in its tone. "We've simply pointed out facts. Your friends are helpless. You're alone. Anything could happen." "What do you want from us?" I asked. "We want you to come home with us, Matthew. You belong here, in the darkness. You understand the world the way we do, through sound, through smell, through touch. Your friends are blind to the real world, but you could see it all." The offer was tempting in a way that terrified me. They were right that I experienced the world differently than sighted people, and there was something seductive about the idea of belonging somewhere, of being understood. But everything about these entities screamed danger. Whatever they were offering, it wasn't friendship. "I belong with my friends," I said firmly. "Do you?" another voice asked. "Look at them, Matthew. When have they ever truly understood you? When have they ever seen the world the way you do? We understand. We know what it's like to live in the darkness." I didn't respond, but their words hit closer to home than I wanted to admit. Ryan and Harry were good friends, but there was always a gap between us, a fundamental difference in how we experienced reality. I'd learned to live with that gap, but these things were offering something I'd never had: true understanding. "Come with us, Matthew," the first voice said, now sounding almost hypnotic. "Leave your sleeping friends. They won't even know you're gone until morning. By then you'll be far away, learning things they could never teach you." I found myself actually considering it for a moment, which scared me more than anything else that had happened that night. Whatever these entities were, they had some kind of influence over human minds, some way of making their offers seem reasonable. I forced myself to focus on my friends' faces, lit by the flickering firelight. They'd brought me on this trip, included me in their adventure, trusted me to hold my own in the wilderness. I couldn't abandon them now. "No," I said again, putting more conviction into my voice. "I'm not going anywhere." The temperature of the voices changed instantly, becoming cold and menacing. "Then you'll stay here forever, Matthew. We'll make sure of that." The threats continued, but I noticed that as dawn approached, the voices seemed to become fainter, less substantial. The eastern sky was beginning to lighten. I could feel the change in the air temperature and the quality of the sounds around us. Whatever these things were, they seemed to be weakened by the approaching daylight. By 6 in the morning, the voices had stopped entirely. The forest around us had returned to normal. Birds singing, small animals rustling in the underbrush, the peaceful babble of the stream. It was as if the nightmare of the past few hours had never happened. Ryan finally stirred around 7, groaning and holding his head. "Jesus Christ," he mumbled. "I feel like I got hit by a truck." "What time is it?" "Morning," I said, adding more wood to the fire even though it was no longer necessary. "You and Harry tied one on pretty good last night." "Yeah, I remember," Ryan said slowly, sitting up in his chair and looking around. "Harry's still out?" I looked over at Harry, who was still slumped in his chair, breathing steadily but showing no signs of consciousness. "Yeah, he's still sleeping it off." Ryan was quiet for a moment, then said, "Matthew, did anything weird happen last night? I have this vague memory of hearing voices, but I figured it was just alcohol dreams." I considered telling him everything, but looking at him in the morning light, hungover, vulnerable, completely unaware of how close we'd come to something terrible, I decided against it. "Nothing strange," I lied, "just a quiet night in the woods." But an hour later, when we were packing up camp, I noticed some things my friends hadn't noticed. There were deep scratches in the bark of several trees around our campsite, all about the size of a man. On the soft soil by the creek, there were footprints that were too big and oddly shaped for human feet. And most disturbing of all, just outside the reach of the light of our fire, there was a neatly arranged pile of small bones. I didn't say any of this. Some experiences are so far beyond the normal limits of human understanding that they cannot be shared. But on the way back to the car, I listened for non-human footsteps and waited for voices calling my name from the shadows in the trees. We never camped together again. Ryan and Harry thought I was not cut out for wilderness adventures, and I let them believe so. But the truth is, I now know that there are things in the deep woods that should not be disturbed, things that hunt in the dark and speak in stolen voices, things that know very well how to prey on people's weaknesses and fears. Even years later, sometimes I still hear them. When I am walking alone at night or in a quiet place where the sound reaches far away, I hear fragments of those voices in the wind calling my name, reminding me of their offerings. They are still there, waiting in the darkness between the trees, patient as only immortal hunters can be. And sometimes, in my darkest moments, I wonder what would have happened if I had said yes. My name is Jacob. I'm 34 years old. I've been blind since birth, which means that all my life I've explored the world through sound, touch, and smell. Most people think that being blind is a huge disadvantage, but to be honest, I've adapted to it quite well. I live independently. I have a good job as a radio producer, and I get along well with my guide dog, Luna. But there is one thing that scares me more than anything else: being alone in the wild. Growing up, my parents overprotected me. They never let me camp with friends or spend much time outdoors unsupervised. As I grew up, this fear of the unknown wilderness became a huge psychological barrier. Whenever anyone mentioned camping or hiking, I would make excuses. The idea of being surrounded by trees, not knowing what lurked in the shadows, completely paralyzed me. But after years of therapy and encouragement from friends, I finally decided it was time to face this fear. I decided to overcome this fear by camping alone. So I started planning a solo camping trip to Blackwood State Forest in northern Michigan. If I was going to do this, I might as well go all the way. No loose ends, no safety net. Just me, my camping gear, and all the courage I could muster. My therapist thought it was a great idea. My friends thought I was crazy. Luna, my guide dog, seemed excited to go somewhere new. I spent weeks preparing for the trip. I memorized every piece of equipment, practiced until I could pitch my tent with my eyes closed, which I think I always am, and even took a wilderness survival course specifically designed for people with disabilities. The instructor, a former park ranger named Bill, was incredibly helpful. He taught me how to distinguish different sounds in the forest, how to navigate using my other senses, and most importantly, how to stay calm when things went wrong. It took about 4 hours to drive from Detroit to Blackwood. I had hired a driver to take me there and pick me up 3 days later. As we got closer to the forest, I could feel the temperature dropping and the smell of the pine trees getting stronger. Luna was panting with excitement in the back seat, probably because she was taking in all the new smells. When we finally reached the beginning of the trail, the driver helped me unload my equipment and wished me luck. Then it was just me and Luna, standing on the edge of an endless wilderness. The first hour of hiking went smoothly. The trail was well maintained, and Luna guided me expertly around roots and rocks. I'd chosen a campsite about 2 miles in, far enough to feel isolated but not so remote that I'd be completely cut off from civilization. The forest was alive with sounds, birds chirping, leaves rustling in the breeze, the distant sound of a stream. It was actually kind of peaceful, and I started to think maybe I'd been worrying about nothing. But as the afternoon wore on, something began to feel off. The normal forest sounds started to fade, replaced by an eerie quiet that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Luna seemed to notice it too. She kept stopping, her ears perked up like she was listening for something I couldn't hear. When I asked her what was wrong, she just whined softly and pressed closer to my leg. By the time we reached the campsite, the sun was starting to set. I could feel the temperature dropping rapidly and the silence was almost oppressive. The forest was making me feel more and more alone. My hands were shaking. I didn't know if it was the cold or the nervousness, so setting up camp took longer than I expected. Luna helped by holding the tent stakes in her mouth, but she seemed calmer than usual. As darkness fell, I built a fire and heated canned soup for dinner. The crackling of the flames was comforting, and Luna curled up next to me, pressing her warm body against my leg. I tried to comfort myself by saying that the first night was always the hardest, but then I heard it, a voice that made my blood run cold. It started with a low growl, so deep that I could feel it vibrating in my chest. At first I thought it might be a bear, but this was different. The sound was very intelligent and very deliberate. It moved around our campsite, staying out of reach of the heat of the fire. Luna's body stiffened beside me, and I could feel her trembling. "Calm down, girl," I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's probably just a curious animal. They'll go away." But the growling didn't stop. In fact, it seemed to be getting closer. I could hear branches snapping under the heavy footsteps, but his gait was wrong. It was not the steady 4-beat rhythm of a large animal. It sounded almost bipedal. I reached for the air horn I had brought for emergencies and gave 3 short blasts. The sound echoed through the forest, and for a moment everything was quiet. Then I heard something that sent shivers down my spine. A sound like laughter. Not human laughter, but something distorted and wrong, as if a hyena was trying to imitate human speech. Luna started barking frantically, her body pressed against mine. I could feel her hackles raised, every muscle in her body tense with fear. Whatever was out there, it had her completely spooked, and Luna was not easily frightened. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to sound braver than I felt. "I'm armed." It was a lie, but I hoped it might scare off whatever was lurking in the darkness. The laughter came again, this time from a different direction. Then another laugh from my left, and another from behind me. My heart started racing as I realized there wasn't just one of these things, there were several, and they were surrounding us. I fumbled for my cell phone, knowing it was probably useless, but hoping for a miracle. No signal, of course. We were completely cut off from the outside world. The fire was starting to die down, and I quickly threw on more wood, desperate to keep the light going. In the brief flare of the flames, Luna suddenly lunged forward, barking aggressively at something just beyond the fire's reach. That's when I heard the most terrifying sound of my life: footsteps. Not the heavy, lumbering steps of a bear, but deliberate, careful footsteps that seemed to be testing the ground with each step, and they were getting closer. I grabbed Luna's harness and pulled her back toward the tent. "Stay close," I whispered. "Don't leave my side." The footsteps stopped just at the edge of what I imagined was the firelight. I could hear breathing, slow, deliberate, like whatever was out there was studying us. Then came a sound that nearly made me jump out of my skin: scratching. Long, deliberate scratches against the bark of a tree, like massive claws raking through wood. "What do you want?" I called out, my voice cracking with fear. The response was immediate and chilling. A voice, if you could call it that, spoke from the darkness. It was raspy and broken, like someone trying to speak with a throat full of gravel. Alone, so alone. The words sent ice through my veins. This wasn't an animal making random sounds. Something was actually speaking to me, and it knew I was alone out here. Luna was growling now, a low, continuous rumble that I'd never heard from her before. She was facing the source of the voice, her body coiled like a spring ready to attack or flee. "We can see you," the voice continued, and I realized there were multiple speakers now, their voices overlapping like a twisted chorus. "But you cannot see us." I hadn't realized the cruel irony. My blindness, which I had learned to live with in the city and even turned into an advantage, here meant a death sentence. These things, whatever they were, could see perfectly well in the dark, whereas I was completely helpless. They knew I was blind and mocked me for it. I could hear movement around us, the breaking of branches, the rustling of leaves, the sound of several large bodies moving in the bushes. They were no longer trying to be quiet. They wanted me to know they were there, to feel helpless. "Beautiful dog," one of the voices hissed, and Luna's growl intensified. His scent, delicious. That was enough. Whatever these things were planning to do to me, I wasn't gonna let them hurt Luna. I grabbed the biggest burning branch from the fire and stood up, holding it in front of me like a weapon. "Back off," I shouted. "I'll burn this forest if I have to." The laughter came again, but this time it was closer, much closer. I could feel hot breath on the back of my neck, and the smell that hit me was indescribable, like rotting meat mixed with wet dog and something else, something metallic and wrong. I spun around, swinging the burning branch, and felt it connect with something solid. There was a terrible shriek, and whatever I'd hit stumbled backward. But before I could feel any relief, claws raked across my shoulder, tearing through my jacket and into my skin. The pain was immediate and searing. Luna launched herself forward, barking and snarling like a wild animal. I heard one of the creatures yelp in pain, and there was the sound of a struggle, but there were too many of them. I could hear them moving around us, their claws clicking against rocks and their raspy breathing coming from all directions. "Run!" I screamed to Luna, but she wouldn't leave my side. She was trying to protect me, even though we were hopelessly outnumbered. I stumbled toward what I hoped was the trail. The burning branch held out in front of me. Behind us, I could hear the creatures following, their footsteps keeping pace with ours but never quite catching up. They were toying with us like cats playing with mice. The trail was rougher than I remembered, and without Luna's guidance I kept stumbling over roots and rocks. My shoulder was bleeding badly, and I could feel the warm blood soaking through my shirt. The burning branch was getting shorter, and I knew that once the fire went out, we'd be completely defenseless. That's when I heard the stream. It was off to my right, maybe 50 yards away. Water meant open space, no trees for these things to hide behind. I changed direction, crashing through the underbrush toward the sound of running water. The creatures seemed to realize what I was doing because their pursuit became more aggressive. I could hear them getting closer, their breathing becoming more labored as they chased us through the dense forest. One of them got close enough to swipe at my back, and I felt claws tear through my backpack. Luna was barking continuously now, alternating between staying at my side and darting back to snap at our pursuers. She was buying us precious seconds, but I knew she couldn't keep it up forever. Finally, we broke through the tree line, and I felt cool air on my face. The sound of the stream was much louder now, and I could hear it flowing over rocks just ahead. I stumbled down the bank and into the water, Luna splashing beside me. The water was freezing and came up to my knees, but I kept moving toward what I hoped was the other side. Behind us, the creatures had stopped at the water's edge. I could hear them pacing back and forth, making frustrated chittering sounds, but they weren't following us into the stream. We reached the other side, and I collapsed on the bank, gasping for breath. My burning branch had finally gone out, leaving us in complete darkness. But for the first time since this nightmare began, the creatures weren't right on top of us. I could hear them across the stream, still making those horrible sounds, but something was keeping them from crossing the water. Maybe they couldn't swim, or maybe running water bothered them somehow. Either way, we had a momentary reprieve. Luna pressed against me, whimpering softly. I could feel she was trembling, whether from cold or fear I couldn't tell. Probably both. I wrapped my arms around her, trying to comfort her while my mind raced to figure out what to do next. The creature's sounds were getting fainter, but I knew they weren't giving up. They were probably looking for another way around the stream or waiting for us to come back. Going back to the campsite was out of the question. Our gear, our food, everything was back there, but it was too dangerous to retrieve. I felt around in my pockets for anything useful. My phone was dead, the emergency whistle was back at camp, and my water bottle had a crack in it from when the creature clawed my backpack. All I had left was a small flashlight that wouldn't do me any good, a few energy bars, and a basic first aid kit. Using supplies from the first aid kit, I tried to clean and bandage my shoulder as best I could in the dark. The cuts weren't too deep, but they stung like hell, and I was worried about infection. Luna seemed unharmed, though I could tell she was exhausted. We needed to find shelter and wait for dawn. Moving through the forest blind in complete darkness was suicide, especially with those things still out there. I felt around until I found a cluster of large rocks that formed a natural windbreak. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. The next few hours were the longest of my life. Every sound made me jump. A branch falling, an owl hooting, the stream gurgling over rocks. Luna stayed pressed against me, occasionally raising her head to listen to something I couldn't hear. Several times I thought I caught the sound of movement in the distance, but the creatures never came close to our hiding spot. As the night wore on, I started to think about how this could have happened. These things, whatever they were, didn't behave like any normal forest animal. They seemed intelligent, organized, almost like they were hunting for sport rather than food. The way they spoke, mocking my blindness, suggested a level of consciousness that was deeply disturbing. Dawn finally came, and with it a measure of relief. I could hear birds starting to sing again, and the oppressive silence of the night began to lift. Luna stirred beside me, and I could tell she was feeling more confident too. But we still had a major problem. We were lost, injured, and had no supplies. The trail back to the parking area was on the other side of the stream, past the campsite where those creatures were probably still lurking. Going back meant walking right into their territory. I decided our best bet was to follow the stream downstream. Most streams in this area eventually led to roads or other human activity, and staying near the water meant we had something to drink and a clear path to follow. The going was slow and treacherous. The bank was rocky and uneven, and without Luna's normal guidance harness, she couldn't help me navigate as effectively. Several times I slipped on wet rocks or caught my foot in holes, jarring my injured shoulder. After what felt like hours of walking, I heard the most beautiful sound in the world, a car engine. We were approaching a road, and civilization was finally within reach. Luna seemed to sense it too, because her pace picked up noticeably. But our relief was short-lived. As we climbed up from the stream bank toward the road, I heard a familiar sound behind us, the low growling that had started this whole nightmare. The creatures had found us again. "Come on, Luna," I urged, stumbling up the steep bank as fast as I could. The growl was getting closer and closer, and we could hear the thud of multiple footsteps in the bushes behind us. We were maybe 50 meters from the road, but we could have been 50 miles away. At that moment, I heard the sound of brakes and the slamming of a car door. "Shit, are you okay?" came a man's voice. "Help," I yelled. "There's something in the woods." Heavy footsteps ran towards us and strong hands grabbed my arms, pulling me the last few meters to the road. Luna jumped up beside us and started barking frantically towards the trees. "Get in the truck," the man said urgently. "Now." He practically threw me into the passenger seat while Luna jumped into the back. As soon as we were inside, he gunned the engine and we sped away from the forest. Through the open window, I could hear one last sound from the trees, that horrible mocking laughter following us down the road. The man who saved us was a local park ranger named Tom. He drove us straight to the hospital where they cleaned and stitched my shoulder wounds. When I tried to tell the doctors and police about what had attacked us, they clearly didn't believe me. They kept asking if I'd seen a bear or a pack of wolves, or if I might have hallucinated due to dehydration and stress. Tom was the only one who seemed to take my story seriously. Later, when we were alone, he told me he'd worked in these forests for 20 years and had heard similar reports before. Most people were too embarrassed to file official reports, but there had been enough incidents that some of the rangers had started warning people against camping alone in certain areas. "What were they?" I asked him. Tom was silent for a long time. "I don't know," he said finally, "but whatever they are, they've been living in these woods a lot longer than we have. I didn't go back for my camping gear. Tom offered to go with a team to get it, but I told him to leave it. I didn't want anything to draw the attention of those creatures to me again. I didn't want to be in the same environment with them again. That was 6 months ago. Since then, I have moved to a city as far away from the wilderness as possible. Luna and I now live in a high-rise apartment. The sounds of traffic that used to bother me before now relax me. The noise of the city makes me feel safe. I still have nightmares about that night. Sometimes I wake up and think I hear that muffled voice calling my name or fingernails scratching on the glass of my window. My therapist says it's post-traumatic stress disorder and the memories will fade with time, but I'm not so sure. Worst of all, I know they are still there, waiting for the next person who dares to enter their territory alone in the dark or act stupid. And they have no compassion, not even for a disabled person like me. I learned a lot about myself on that camping trip, but not in the way I had hoped. Some fears are justified. Being alone in the wilderness is not a challenge to be overcome, but a justifiable warning to be avoided. I still sometimes get updates from Tom about new incidents in the forest. After my attack, there were 3 more attacks, all on lone campers. Official reports blame bears or wolves, but Tom and I know the truth. Those creatures are still there, still hunting, still waiting for the next person who thinks they can overcome their fear by facing the unknown alone. If you are reading this and thinking about camping alone in a remote area, please think again. Some experiences are not worth the risk, and some fears are there to keep us alive. Trust me, I learned this the hard way, and I was lucky to have survived this lesson.